Okay, Kermit Weeks here, Sprout Lake, Canada. I got the Hawaiian Mars behind me. It's in the water. And what do you say we do a Kermie Cam through the Philippine Mars, huh? Get checked out a little bit, see what it's like inside. Obviously, we've got the beaching gear off of this one out here, and I wanted to show you what that looked like before we got over to the Philippine Mars, because it's still on the airplane there. So this is basically the beaching gear off the the port and the starboard side. I got the different colored things. I can never remember which color goes where. But when we get over to the Philippine Mars, you can see that this thing it runs basically like a little tricycle. Either pulls like that or goes the other way. Tail gear's the same way. It's got little deal there. Oh, that's kind of interesting. It either rolls on one there or actually rolls on two here on the flotation. This is where it pins up on the top on the main beaching gear and pins on the bottom down in there. So anyway, so that's that. Let's go check out the Philippine Mars. Now, is this cool or what? I'm going to be adjusting the cameras here a little bit during our tour, because we're actually going to get inside the wing. I will be going there for the first time, and I've got a little headlamp, so we'll see how this is all going to work. As you can see, this one's pretty much buttoned down. Two cables on the front there to hold it. If you can look up on the top wing there, you can actually see they've got some spoilers up there, lift spoilers. If they get a big wing or a big wind going, they've got those up on the wing to kill the lift. And look at that, they've actually got two tie down places out on the wing tie down as well. This has a 200-foot wingspan, which is basically 40 feet longer per side than a short Sunderland. So let me get out here and let's just kind of pace that off. Okay, that's the wingspan of a Sunderland right there, just about a foot, 2 feet inside of where the float attaches on the inside there. That is a monster float. I think somebody told me that's like 18 feet long or something like that. It's got 4 3350-24W engines. They put out about 2,500 horsepower apiece. Curtis electric propellers. We'll get to see those when we get up to the front. The Philippine Mars here was actually used quite a bit in the Korean War. They actually hauled people, medevac people from Korea to the hospitals in Hawaii. This particular one has got an absolutely gorgeous belly on it. I don't know if they ever reskinned this or whatever, but the belly doesn't even look like it's hit anything in its lifetime. So here we go. So here's the beaching gear on the port side up there. This is obviously for the buoyancy right there, and I'm sure it's designed for it to float properly. It's kind of interesting. You don't think about it. It looks pretty heavy, but actually the air in the tire gives it some buoyancy, and they actually put calcium, I understand, in the tire to get it to the proper weight so it'll hang properly. Otherwise, this could float like this, and that, of course, then you couldn't hook it up top there. But you can see where those pins pin in on each side, and then it connects down here somewhere. Also, too, it's kind of interesting, I don't know if you can see it, but right here there's a hole. There's a hole there, a hole there. You can actually rotate this beaching gear to any 45-degree setting. So in some instances, to get between hangars or something, the airplane, I think, is about 120 feet long, but it's a 200-foot wingspan. So if the gear was set up like this, you could do it with all three. You could actually move the airplane this way, which is pretty cool. The Philippine Mars here has actually side dump doors here for the water bombing. And so the belly is pretty clean here, except for the probes, which are actually back here, okay? So here's one probe on the left side, there's one over on the right side, and these actually come down to about just below the step right there, okay? They come down just below the step. Their pickup speed is 70 knots, and so basically they have a couple of options. They can actually, when they go to take off, they can actually let it skim at 70 knots. They drop the probes. They can actually pick up on a takeoff, or if they've already dumped the load and they're coming back in, they can actually land, get the airplane about 70 knots. Co-pilot drops the probes, and they actually time this. They time these. You can imagine how fast the water is going up into those two probes. And in this particular case, the water tanks are actually above the deck. So there's actually two decks. When you walk in the cargo deck here, there's a deck here basically on this rivet line right here. And there's another deck on a higher rivet line up there. And originally the airplane, all the fuel tanks were actually below that rivet line. And in this case, this has all the original fuel tanks, and they installed the tanks up top there. On the Hawaiian Mars out in the water there, they actually they used a significant amount of the fuel tanks to put the water in it. So it's a little easier to walk around in the Hawaiian Mars. This one you've got to crawl under the water tanks, which we'll do a little bit later. So that airplane does not have as much fuel range as this one did. And this one, oh my God, this thing, I'll bet this thing has, you know, at least a full day's flying worth of endurance. You know, you could probably stay airborne for 24 hours plus, maybe 30 hours. Anyway, so that's where they actually dump out the water when they're dumping. It's interesting too, because on the Hawaiian Mars, they've actually got a whole series of doors here, and they've got a series of doors after the step, and they can actually, they've isolated to where they, on either one, the Hawaii or the Philippines, you can either drop the left side or the right side, or you can drop them both at the same time. And in the case of the Hawaii one, it actually, which is out of the bottom, it puts out a certain spray pattern. And one of the things they did when they were doing it here, it obviously comes out further, so it's got a wider swath. I'm not sure exactly, you know, maybe there might have been different applications, but I think when they were out on the fires, probably anything was good. As you can see, they've kind of got the doors cracked right now. Also, too, one of the things that they're obviously concerned about in the design of the water bomber is once this thing goes down and it's filling up, they don't have a gauge. The gauge wouldn't work anyway as to how much water's in there, because the water is so turbulent as it's filling up there. It's 70 knots. And basically what happens is they would actually time it. And I think it puts in 1,000 gallons a second. So they would come in, and depending on how much water, they would have to calculate the weight, because the airplane has to have a certain weight and balance. You want to make sure you don't overload it. What they would do is they go in there, they would determine how much they could take on, depending on how much fuel they had or whether they could fill the tanks up or not. But basically they would say, okay, 20 seconds, okay? So they would actually time how long the probes were in the water, and for every second they're basically putting on, I think, 1,000 gallons or 1,000 pounds or something like that. Anyway, no, it'd be 1,000 pounds, I think, because it holds 7,200 gallons. I'm pretty sure. I'm not exact on that, but I'm pretty close. So anyway, but they basically time it, and I think probably full tanks is like 23 seconds or something like that. I'm just taking a guess, but I do know that I think the other day we picked up 20 seconds. So if for some reason if a probe gets stuck, or they overflow it, or they're going to fill the tank or something like that, they have to have somewhere for the water to go. Otherwise, it's going to rip the probe off potentially. If you go too fast, I think at 80 knots, the probe's designed to actually bust off the airplane. And of course, the tanks are basically, in this airplane, above the water line. So even if you have a leak in the probe or something, it's not that critical, because all you can do is fill up a little tube of water. In the Hawaiian Mars, if they get a leak, which actually we've got a leak in there right now, they're going to have to they're going to pull it out later today, and they're going to basically seal up one of the doors. The only thing that fills up is basically that one tank, and only up to the water line. So, and what they do is on the Hawaiian Mars is when they take off, and they know they've got little weight gauges up on the pilot dash, and they can tell if there's water in there or not. And what they'll do is that once they get up to a certain speed, like I think 16 knots or something like that, they can actually trail the doors, and the doors on the belly of the Hawaiian Mars just kind of like trail, and it sucks the water out. Then they close them shut, and they're good to go. But anyway, those big, I think those the two little grills up there on the top there are actually the overflows. So once the tank gets full, any water that's still basically going in there just comes dumping out there. So it's kind of a pressure relief thing. So that's basically the probe system for the two airplanes. That's a rear hatch. I may actually go in there later so I don't have to crawl under the tank. Coming in the back here, we got the tail beaching gear. Of course, we saw that over there for the Hawaiian Mars. Of course, here's one of the ways that it rolls around. This is obviously down here. This handle right here, when you pull that, it pulls the bottom pin that's pinned down there, and then this handle and this handle over here pop those pins there. So it takes two boats to basically take this off. You got to have a boat on this side, a boat on this side. Once everybody's kind of in position and ready, then the guy on the port side will pull this one. This will actually start floating up a little bit, and when it kind of gets away from the airplane, these guys have to coordinate at the same time to pop those off to basically, pull it away from the back of the boat. This right here is basically how they pull the airplane out of the water, but also how they lower it into the water. Big shackle there, big cable. This little part right here actually can pull up inside the airplane, and once it gets down into the water to a certain point, they basically open that up. The guy comes out, he undoes the clevis pin here, drops this cable, and then the boat goes off. That's another interesting deal that I'll show you in a second. So this cable basically hooks to this winch truck here, which I think is like original World War II kit. This thing looks like it was built in about, early 40s, something like that. Probably specifically for the seaplanes. This guy here will actually, when they put it into the water, he'll actually face forward this way, so he's got to turn around, and it took him a while to get it in the water. But basically, you want to line it up on this line here and keep the airplane pretty much going straight ahead as it goes down the ramp, and keep it aligned. And I'll walk over and I'll show you how they do that in a little bit too. But basically, he'll steer that back to a certain point, and then once it gets to a certain point, I'll show you that later, and I'll explain what happens, which is really pretty interesting. This thing is a lot more involved than I expected, and is a lot more labor intensive than the short Sunderland. This is the little truck inside there, pretty cool. I don't think it's been restored since World War II, but cute little thing. Okay, I don't know exactly how this works in the back, but these are obviously probably brakes and clutch releases for, going forward or backward, because they can lower the cable, but they can also use it to pull it out of the water. There we go, that side there. You cannot believe all the maintenance equipment, special equipment it takes to keep this airplane going. And they've got there's the probe on the starboard side, step, beaching gear on the right side. There's the dump doors, and then the overflow doors up there. We're starting to get a little sprinkle. Okay, so let's go ahead inside the airplane and check it out. Interesting view from here. This thing is so big. Oh my God, it's so big. So we're going to start our tour coming in the door here. And the first place we're going to go is the bow. And I am going to undo the door here to basically show you what it looks like outside. Let there be light. Okay, so basically, that's obviously where the bowsman hangs out. There's a cable in here that basically is what he uses to connect to the, you know, when they're pulling the airplane out, or up to, I assume, potentially the mooring buoy. There's escape hatches everywhere. It's my understanding only one person in operation ever got killed on a Mars, and somehow they were hanging onto the door here when they were on the step or something like that, and the door sucked them out and they got killed. That's what somebody told me. Here's the anchor over here, okay, and that obviously, this pole here basically goes into this thing out there, and that's how they pull it in and out, but obviously somehow this thing's got to connect up to this bow cable, I guess, on the bow. And then it has a winch system that's over here that has an electric motor. Looks like they got a clutch for forward and backwards. Another escape hatch here. And basically, let's go take a peek out the nose here. There we go. There's the tie down cables. And I think maybe when the airplanes are gone and off the base, I think they painted this thing on the ramp to basically show the people how actually big the deal was. Now, what I wanted to point out is when the guy tugs the airplane down this line right here out towards the water, you know, to put it in the water, when he gets to a point to where the beaching gear wheels, the main wheels, are like just at the top of the ramp there, well, obviously, if that fricking Mars went over the edge there, that truck would be sailing in the water with it. So what they do is this cable over here that's loose actually connects to the front of the truck and connects to the two cables there. So they actually chain, or they cable the truck there, and then once that's done, they'll basically, you know, tow it a little bit and get it just over the edge, and at that point they'll disconnect the tow bar. They tie a rope to it, and basically with a guy on each side, once the guy starts letting the cable out of the winch, then what happens is they basically just steer it, you know, by hand, you know, with a guy on each side holding the tow bar, you know, with a rope, and they steer it into the water. Now what's interesting, I don't know if you can see it from here, but you see where the ramp goes down straight, and if you follow over there where those little parking steps are, just to the left of that fourth one, there's a little puddle of water, there's a cable laying there, okay? And it kind of where the little corner is there, but that little cable laying there, that's actually, they connect that to a truck that backs up over here, and that cable actually goes down into the water to another big chunk of concrete that has a pulley on it, and they actually bring a cable up and connect it to the nose here. And so as the guy is actually lowering the boat into the water, the guy with the truck over here is actually backing up and actually pulling, not, well, he's keeping the line tight because the main line is basically lowering it into the water. But what they do is, if a wind picks up, this thing has got such a big tail on it and stuff, and it's got so much side area that you can't control it with a boat or anything. So once they get it down to a certain point, they want to make sure they can keep pulling it out into the water, and they basically do that with that truck and that pulley. And then once they, of course by this time they have connected a boat to it, once they get it far enough away, then they're good enough to disconnect the front, and then the boat takes it out to the buoy. They actually have 3 buoys out here. The Hawaiian Mars is on one of the airplane buoys. There's another airplane buoy over there, kind of up and to the left of the maintenance stand, okay, where that boat's heading towards it. And then the one that's closest to shore here is actually the fueling buoy, okay, and they actually have a fuel farm on the shore here that has a hose that goes all the way out to that little buoy on the left. It comes up to the top, it's got a little thing they can disconnect it, connect a hose to it, and that's where they actually do the fueling. So the permanent buoys where they let them sit is where the Hawaii one is. There's another one over there. They keep them as separated as they can. This little piece of equipment over here they call a chuck wagon. I think it looks like half of a Conestoga wagon, but they modified a lift truck with that on there so they could work in the wintertime, cover it up in the rain. They've got heat, a couple of heat things that they can pump in there, and the guys can work on it during inclement weather. Of course, you can see the beaching gear over there where came off the Hawaiian Mars. And so basically, let's take a peek over here out the bow. You can see the lift spoilers that are out on the wing there, you know, in case a big wind comes up. Like I said, 3350-24W engines, 2,500 horsepower apiece. The propellers are Curtis Electric. They're actually hollow welded steel. And when you're cruising around, the airplane kind of, you know, burns about 450 gallons an hour. I did a quick calculation. That comes out to about 7.5 gallons a minute. And if you take that down even to another calculation, that works out to be a gallon every 8 seconds that you're flying. It takes basically a country above a third world country budget to operate one of these. So in the past, it's either been the American government with the U.S. Navy, or it's been the Canadian government with the Canadian Forestry Service. So other than that, there's not too many people with the wherewithal and or the resources to keep something like this flying. It is unbelievable how much water support, land support, employee support, operational support. It's just off the chart. The Sunderland looks like a practical four-engine flying boat to me. So basically, this, we don't want to fall off of here, especially on the concrete, because it's quite a long fall. That would not be good. I'm trying to think what else I could tell you. That's basically the view from the bowsman back to the cockpit, which is pretty cool. So we're going back down into the hold here.